Good afternoon and welcome to You and Your Business with me, Alec on 103.2 Dublin City FM. Each week, I invite an expert from the world of business to share their knowledge, insights, and tips to help you with your business challenges. If there's a topic you would like covered, or if you feel you can make a contribution, please email me at yourbusiness@dublincityfm.ie, and perhaps we'll be having a chat here one day soon. My guest today has over 15 years' experience as a solicitor dealing with family law, litigation, estate planning, and conveyancing. He runs Summit Law, which he set up in 2016, and he's president of a BNI chapter and has a keen interest in motorsport, cars, and rugby. I'm delighted to welcome Cillín O'Connell to the You and Your Business studio. Hi, Cillín.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great to have you here. And motorsport, we'll talk about that in a minute. But I will take you back to your last year in school. I mean, were you this studious person? Did you want to travel? Did you want to get straight into business? Or what did you want to do?
Always wanted to get to college, and I wanted to do a little bit of motorsport and a few little bit of studies and extracurricular activities on the side. But I wanted to go to UCD, and that's where I ended up doing business and legal studies.
Fantastic. We'll have a look at that in just a minute. Just tell us about the motorsport that you had an interest in. Where could that have taken you to?
Oh, well, I suppose that pipe dream would have taken us all the way to F1 or something. But no, I loved karting. I always had an interest in motorsport, and I'd saved up to buy myself one of these little 100cc ones. They're much quicker than what you get when you rent them. And I loved it. I did a little bit of that, and but it's like anything else, the funds ran dry. So my career was somewhat limited, but I loved it. It was a great crack to do.
Yeah, and what's the next stage after that? Is Formula 3 or Formula 4?
It would be kind of a Formula Ford. Now there's higher levels of karting, so you can end up going into the 250 cc's, which really they'll hit 150. I mean, they'll really. Yeah, but again, you needed somewhat more funds, and then Formula Ford into the single seaters and go from there.
Well, fantastic. All right, okay. So common sense hit you though,
Common sense.
and you went into the world of you went to university. So tell us about that. You had choices and things to make there.
Yeah, I went to UCD and I did business and legal studies, and I was a little bit on the fence between going into a business career or a legal career. So I sort of started in one and ended up doing the other. And then when I qualified, I worked for Bank of Ireland selling the SSIAs, which I loved doing.
Right. Just in terms of banking versus law, what was the sort of the decision around that? What sort of motivated you in one or the other?
Well, I knew when I was in school, I was always good at history and English. I was never that good at maths, but I kind of always wanted to try the banking world. And actually, coming out of college, I wanted to fund a little bit of the motorsport. So I just wanted to make a little bit of money, and then kind of decide what to do. And I was very lucky with Bank of Ireland because they offered me a sales job selling the SSAA packages, and I did that for about 8 months, about 10 months, and it was very, very useful because it was a real, you're dealing with people straight off the bat, and you're going into each branch, and you're asking people, do you have one of these special SSAA savings accounts? And you're trying to explain on the spot. But it was great.
Actually, you might just tell our listeners, because there's probably plenty of them young enough not to even know what an SSIA is. And thank goodness I did at the time. But explain what that was about and why it was set up.
Well, it was a specific timeline whereby if you invested, it was a government incentive whereby if you invested in this SSAA package and it was over 4 years, for every 100 euros you put in, the government would top that up by 25 euros. And it was a great way for families, husband and wife would set it up, and they'd set them up for the kids as well, just to get everybody on the ladder. And I think as a saving scheme, it was one of the best that the government ever did at the time. And from my point of view, it was a really easy way to get into sort of financials and financial sales.
Yeah. And certainly there was a great incentive there with that government, but it was there to sort of dampen down the sort of spending that the Irish were doing at the time.
Yeah, and obviously I don't know how that panned out because I know anything. A lot of people who saved money ended up, to some extent, putting them in deposits for properties and this, that, and the other. But a lot of people spent them on, it might be some other investment, or they let it roll over into something else. So there was a lot of people who had a great deal of success with it, and I think we'd all be delighted if something like that came
I
about
think,
again.
well, I think it also would have created a culture of saving, which maybe hitherto we hadn't had.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And obviously the market was sort of taking off then in the late 90s and the early noughties. So there was a lot of people, I think, used it for either foreign or domestic investments. And hopefully they got something out of it.
Must be nice because you were doing quite a lot of traveling from branch to branch, so you were meeting people from both the rural and the city community. So different people on a continuous basis.
Yeah, I mean, even just the different branches run in different ways. It was very interesting to meet all the staff in the branches, and then you get to meet the different clients, and it was very different how each branch was run, and very different how the people who had their accounts kind of viewed their branch, and how they went about business, because how it was run in Sandymount and how people would use their bank in Sandymount was very different to how they would run it in Montrose or in Dunleary.
Right.
And well, there was there'd be an older clientele in Sandymount, and there would be more younger clients and branch members in Montrose, and it was very different how it was run, but it was so lovely, and you got to meet everybody and anyone.
Just to put you on the spot a bit, and an interesting insight I've had from people, that often organizations with a large branch network, that they can often be different organizations from the outside. So you would have had experience. Was it like working for the same organization, or did each branch nearly seem like an autonomous company?
I think that's the best way to describe it. I mean, you almost wouldn't know that you were part of a network. It was very much, and in a really nice way. You'd go in on a Monday and you'd introduce yourself, say, "Listen, I'm here selling the SSAAs," and they'd know who from the headquarters would have sent you in, and you're introduced, and everyone brings you for coffee, and you sit down. It was really nice, but again, just totally different way of running it, and it was kind of very interesting because it wasn't as if one was better than the other. It was just lovely to see how they ran
Different
them.
cultures, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, same organization with different cultures. It's nice. I tell you what, it's nice to have those memories. You could have been in there after the recession, where it might have been slightly different.
Oh, yeah, I was very lucky from that point of view. Nothing but fond memories, and
You're
people were
doing
only
something
too
different.
happy.
Yeah.
Well, as I say, people were only too happy to set up accounts. I mean, after the recession, I think that would have been a very hard sell.
I think it might have been all right. You also had a stint in Citibank, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I did. I did a year in Citibank as a fund administrator. And so very different coming from Bank of Ireland, whereby you're dealing with the branch network and you're dealing with small groups of people. I was based in the IFSC, and I think it was over 900 people in the office there. A very different way of doing things. Equally enjoyable, but if I had my choice going back, I think the financial sales I was a little bit more adept to than fund administration. It was just lovely to look at and lovely to do, but it's just that's where I decided after that maybe the legal world is where I truly belong.
You're going to get a calling. And if you're just listening to us now, you're listening to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my guest today is Cillín O'Connell. We were just talking about banking, but banking wasn't going to be your chosen career. You decided to head off into the world of law. Tell us a bit about that decision, and what aspects of law you had a particular sort of draw for.
Well, I suppose if I go back to it, and my mother would be a great help on this because she's a teacher, and she would always know really not so much what your preferences were, but what your strengths were. And my strengths were always at history and English, and I always had a deep love of history. And for whatever reason, I always had an inkling, and she would have suggested it to me as well. And ultimately, when I decided to leave banking and go back to law, it was on her recommendation. So I'm here now very much because of her. So she has to get the credit for it.
Yeah, and had it gone wrong, you could have sued her. All right. So there's many areas of law that you can either specialize in, but where were you going to focus and where were you going to start your career?
Oddly enough, when I went into it, I went in very much with an open mind. Criminal law is very exciting to study to start with, and then there's commercial law, which is a lot of people would lean in that direction. But I very much wanted to come at it from a general point of view to look at a few areas and then see which ones I liked, and I was lucky enough to be able to do that.
Right. Was there a particular area of a general practice that you particularly liked?
Yeah, I did like, and I still like, trying to help people with family law and with litigation and estate planning. And then I do a lot of conveyancing as well. So it's a wide variety of things. They're different skill sets, but it's again trying to help people either through a difficult situation, or if it's something like conveyancing, it's much more time critical, and you're dealing with people in sort of compact situations. But again, you're trying to go on the journey with them.
I mean, you would have in the time that you've been involved, you've seen some fairly major changes in the way the sort of whole legal practice. You know me, I'm a bit more cynical about the legal world, about bringing them up to date, but I know you're different to that.
Well, no, it is true. I mean, and it is changing. It's changing rapidly. I mean, when I would have started, it was much more. There was much more sort of letter writing and correspondence. Now you're still dealing with clients on the phone a lot, but it's much. Whereas now it's much more. There's emails, there's Zoom calls as well as meetings. So you're dealing with a client much more on a day-to-day basis. So it's not as if the work has gotten any harder or longer. It's much more involved, and the communication is much more forwards and back. I mean, you can't, you have to keep everybody up to date because it's just the way of the world. We're all there in front of our emails trying to make sure we get them dealt with.
Yeah, certainly communication is much more seamless and with a variety of sort of channels to be able to do that through. So people's expectations are that they will be kept updated and informed at all times. So that must present a challenge, particularly to some of the older people in the sector.
Yeah, it is very interesting how some people would prefer a letter. Some people would prefer a phone call, and yet some people are much happier just getting updated by email. So you are presented with those different challenges. But the first thing is just to say to people, what is your preference? And the more we get to know them, the more we get to find what they like. But as long as they hear from us, that's the main thing.
One of the greatest areas of change within the world of law in this country would have been divorce having come into effect. I can't even remember how long ago now, but it's taken some time, I think, for people to adjust to it, and then those cases starting to appear. How have the legal world responded to that?
Yeah, it's changing recently again because obviously the timeline for divorce has moved from 4 years down to 2 years, whereby a person can make that application. There's dedicated family law courts specifically for that down in Smithfield and Dublin, and obviously
Oh,
around the country. So it is, and already they need to be expanded. So it is an area whereby, you know, there's a lot of family law to be. I suppose the best way to explain it is people are always wanting to get it resolved as quickly as possible. So if it's a divorce, for example, you're in the circuit court unless it meets a certain threshold, if it's a certain value of assets that's between the parties, and then it goes into the high court. But everyone wants to have it resolved as quickly and as neatly as possible. So that's whereby it's not that it's gotten any more complex, but it's definitely more time sensitive. People want to be able to have their matter dealt with as quickly as possible. The only thing is, I suppose, after COVID, the courts are still playing catch up to a certain extent. So you're trying to push things on as quickly as you can.
What do you think are the biggest mistakes people make? I mean, people getting divorced, it can be contested or it can be amicable. You see both sides of that. Maybe just give some broad strokes what you see and what you think would make a difference for people.
Well, mediation is always recommended. So before people would go to court, it's always recommended. Well, number one, can they try and resolve their differences? That's the first thing. Is that something that the two individuals can sit down with and try and resolve? If not, then we always recommend mediation, because the problem with any dispute is you're dealing with emotions and you're dealing with people who have a certain view. But ultimately, the marriage, if they are a married couple, is going to come to an end. So it's to try and see what you can agree. The more things you can agree on, potentially the quicker it's going to be. And importantly, the cheaper it's going to be for people. People don't want to have these sort of long drawn out disputes, because that's what can end up costing more money. And what they're fighting over, it could be taken off the two of them anyway if they end up in some large legal wrangle. So it's always to say to people, try and resolve as many things as you can right from the get-go.
And in terms of that mediation side, if you're approached, do you have somebody you can recommend for mediation, or how does that all work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of accredited mediators, both in Dublin, for example, and all over the country. And if I know a number that I can recommend, but if not, I say to people, just go on to Google, because the whole idea about a mediator is they don't act for either party. They're an independent person, but they're also somebody who knows how the legal system works and who knows how the court system works. So they will have a very good handle on your case and trying to come to an agreement for both parties.
And I suppose they have the skill set to diffuse volatile situations.
Very much so, and that's where your accredited mediator will have training in that, as well as having the legal background, because it is a volatile situation. It's not pleasant. I've said it to people before. I see people aging from a family law dispute, and it's the mental health struggles that people go through with divorce is as hard as anything else. So if you can have an accredited mediator, or somebody who's able to sit both sides down independently and offer a solution, it may not get all the issues dealt with, but it can actually bring a lot of the issues to the table in order to say, well, listen, we're over halfway there now. And it helps me in my work.
And if you're just joining us now, you're listening to You and Your Business with me, Alec Drew, on 103.2 Dublin City FM, where my guest today is Cillín O'Connell of Summit Law. We were just talking about mediation. Do you ever find a situation after a mediation that people kind of go, actually, I think we should stick together? That it's we needed to kind of just say things to one another, and we never got the opportunity.
And you see, and that's why I'd recommend it, because it's before any legal proceedings are issued. Because the difficulty is, once the legal proceedings are issued, that the horse is bolted, and it's while people can obviously decide to withdraw their proceedings, I won't say it's rare when they do, but it's just they feel like they have to go through with it. Then, if you have counselling or if you have mediation beforehand, maybe you can resolve it. And I've dealt with cases where people have been divorced and they've subsequently remarried. So it's not for everyone.
No, it's amazing. Sometimes a break is needed. When you talk about family law, is that just the only area of family law, or are there other areas that you get involved in?
There's separation, there's divorce, but there's also in the lower courts and the district court, you would have maintenance and access and guardianship issues. So they're sort of we wouldn't even call them the everyday issues, but they're sort of more pressing issues that would be dealt with in a neater and quicker timeline. But they can cause as much stress for anybody else, because especially when you're dealing with children and that, and that's what the district court is there for.
Right. So that means you can be heard fairly quickly.
Yeah. If somebody was to put in a request for an access whereby one party is not seeing a child, for example, they're normally dealt with within 2 to 3 months. They'd go into their local district court, and in Dublin, for example, it's done in Blanchardstown, and it's done in Dolphin House, and obviously it's done in Bray for Wicklow, and it just means that if I put in an application today, be it for maintenance or access or guardianship, you're generally dealt with within a 2 to 3 month period, and touch wood that deals with the matter.
Oh, fantastic. So there's other areas that you practice in as well. I always love the word practice, suggests that you haven't really done it, that you're just getting there. That's how it is. What other parts of the practice have you got that deals with everyday affairs?
Well, conveyancing is one, because that's when people are buying or selling, or they're remortgaging a property. And obviously it's very topical at the moment. And again, it's very stressful, but it's a different form of stress, because if somebody's buying a property, they're normally dealing with a lender and they're trying to get their a mortgage together, and then they're dealing with our offices to try and make sure that the legal title is good and that we're able to sign the contracts. But there's the human aspect of it. They're renting. They have a certain amount of time in terms of dealing with the landlord to vacate. And with the banks at the moment, they're slow to issue the loan offers. So you're trying to box all that off as well and make sure that everything is dealt with neatly.
So, Cillín, tell me, what are the biggest challenges in terms of conveyancing these days?
Firstly, when clients are looking at properties, obviously there's a shortage of properties. Then we have, I suppose, in one respect, a shortage of banks. So they're limited in terms of the supply of property. So by the time they get their loan offer, by the time they've been, I suppose, successful enough to be the winning bid of any property, be it a new build or a previously built property, they're already quite stressed. So by the time they come to us, we're trying to deal with the legal title, get them to where they're signing the contracts, and then once the contracts are signed and exchanged, then get the loan drawn down and for the closing date and get them the keys. It's very, very time sensitive, and it's to be able to do that within their time constraints. The main difficulty as well is if there's a chain. So they might want to close on this Friday, but it just so happens that people selling are also buying their own property, and you're trying to put these deals together as best as you can.
In terms of gazumping, can that happen right up to the last minute, or are we usually past that part of the challenge?
It's rare when I see that, because once somebody agrees a purchase price with your estate agent, the property is taken off the market. They pay a booking deposit. It's only if the contracts are not signed or exchanged that either side can back out of the deal. Specifically, I suppose the seller can, but I don't see, in my experience, the gazumping. People talk about it, but I certainly don't see it in my experience.
I think it was more prevalent many years ago, but at the last minute, people pulling out of deals and things like that because they got a better offer. And I suppose that created all sorts of issues. And anyway, we won't get into that. It's the past, and I'm glad you don't see it too often.
Yeah, no, it's that. I would.
Yeah, it's not there. Tell me, there's another side of it, which is a challenge for you, which is, well, it's not a challenge, it's just part and parcel of the business. It's the whole area of estates and wills and creating them.
Yeah. Obviously, making a will, I recommend to people, because it's no different to taking out travel insurance or life insurance or anything like that. And what you're trying to do is to make sure if something were to happen to you or your loved ones are looked after. So it's a very delicate process, but it's one that I always like to help people on, because it just means that if you can get that resolved for them, that they can put it out of their mind, and they know that if something were to happen, that their loved ones are looked after.
It's there's some fairly high number, isn't there, percentage-wise, of people who don't have wills?
Huge. It's anywhere, but we see it's anywhere between 70 to 80% of people just don't.
Wow, that's a lot of people. And I think people don't realize that what the potential harm is if you don't have a will and you pass away.
There's a lot of misinformation. But the easiest thing that I say to people is, if you make a will, you get to decide exactly what happens to your estate. Your estate is, real estate, as in property or any other asset that you own. But if you don't make a will, what will happen is that it goes to your nearest relatives alive at the time. But you may not want that to get that. That's just the simplest way to explain it. So what I say to people is, if you draw up a will, it just means that everything that you want, according to your wishes, is looked after. And obviously we can advise you on that as well. So it's to give people that peace of mind.
And is it expensive to draft up a will these days?
No, not at all. We don't actually charge a fee for our clients in terms of doing it, because it's especially for new clients, it's a way of introducing new clients to the business, and to sort of explain to them that, as their solicitor, if, for example, we draw up a will for you, guess what? You might need us for something else. You might be buying a property or something in the future. And it's just to give them that peace of mind and security.
Right. So that's fantastic. Are there any other areas of the legal world that you're covering at the moment?
Yeah, well, litigation is another thing that we do, and it's a little bit of an all-encompassing term. It might be a dispute between a company dispute or directorships disputes, or it can be if there's we'll call it warring parties, but they tend to be of a company nature. I do a little bit of personal injury, but for clients, existing clients, in that it's not it wouldn't be the backbone of the business, but it's an area that I've expertise in the background on.
Right, and personal injuries has its own challenges, I'm sure. But,
Yeah,
but there
vastly
have
changing.
been massive advancements there with the what's it, Personal Injuries Assessment Board, is it?
Yeah, and they do excellent work, because it just means a lot of the time any personal injury that if somebody has an injury, that rather than go directly into the legal system, that it has to go through the injuries board, and it is having incredible success, and long may it last, because we all want to have our claims dealt with quickly and neatly, and lower insurance premiums.
All right. In the last 20 seconds, then you might tell people where they might find out more about you and how to contact you.
If you can go onto summitlaw.ie, you'll all our details are there, and my personal email is on that as well. You'll always get a hold of me.
Fantastic, Cillín. Thanks very much indeed for coming into the You and Your Business show. Losing, put the teeth back in, Alec. And thanks also to Sam and Sam. The podcast today show will be available on dublincityfm.ie from tomorrow. Thank you for your company. And please remember to join me, Alec Drew, again next week at the same time, 1 o'clock, right here on 103.2 Dublin City FM for another edition of You and Your Business.